When most people remember Johnny Carson, they picture the sharp-witted host who made millions laugh from behind his desk on The Tonight Show. But behind the jokes, the easy grin, and the impeccable timing was a man who saw more of Hollywood's triumphs and tragedies than most ever would. Carson wasn't just a late-night legend, he was a quiet observer of fame's brutal cost. In private moments, he spoke about the 7 stories from Hollywood's golden age that haunted him most, stories so heavy he could never bring himself to joke about them on air. These stories weren't gossip or punchlines. They were warnings. They revealed how the same studios that made dreams come true could just as easily destroy the very people who embodied those dreams. Let's revisit those 7 lives, and through Carson's eyes, uncover what they say about a system that often devoured its brightest stars. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 1. Judy Garland, the girl who never got to grow up. Johnny Carson adored Judy Garland's talent, but pitted the cruel childhood that Hollywood carved out for her. She was only 13 when MGM turned her into Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Behind the Technicolor smiles, she was a frightened girl force-fed a diet of pills, coffee, and cigarettes to stay thin and awake. Studio handlers timed her sleep, monitored her meals, and taught her to fake joy for the camera. Carson once said that Garland was the perfect metaphor for old Hollywood. Dazzling on the surface, broken beneath. He had watched her guest on The Tonight Show several times, her voice trembling as she tried to appear cheerful. Off camera, she was reportedly exhausted, trembling for medication, and terrified that she'd lose her audience's love if she didn't perform. By her late 20s, Garland had survived multiple breakdowns and divorces, all while raising children in the glare of tabloid lights. Studios discarded her when she became unreliable. The same people who once called her America's sweetheart now labeled her uninsurable. Carson, who fought his own battles with addiction and loneliness, understood her despair. When she died in 1969 from an accidental overdose, he refused to do a monologue about it. He simply paused, looked down at his desk, and said, "She gave us everything she had." 2. Montgomery Clift, the actor who couldn't heal. Montgomery Clift changed acting forever. Long before method acting became Hollywood's obsession, Clift brought vulnerability and raw truth to the screen. Carson admired him for that, but also for his courage to live differently in a time that punished difference. In 1956, after a late-night party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift crashed his car. The accident shattered his face, broke his nose and jaw, and left him permanently disfigured. Carson was one of the few who later reflected publicly on how Hollywood reacted. They didn't see a man in pain, they saw damaged property. Clift returned to acting, but his confidence never recovered. He relied on alcohol and painkillers just to make it through the day. Behind closed doors, he faced another torment, living as a closeted gay man in an era when that truth could end a career. Friends later described his post-accident years as the slowest suicide in Hollywood. Carson respected Clift's refusal to fake normalcy. He once told a producer, "Clift wasn't ruined by that crash, he was ruined by what this town did to him afterward." When Clift died at 45, alone in his apartment, Carson mourned him as one of the most honest souls Hollywood ever broke. 3. Marilyn Monroe, the face of a fragile dream. Carson never made jokes about Marilyn Monroe. He had met her once, briefly, at a party in the late 1950s, and was struck by how shy she was, far from the bombshell persona the world adored. She wasn't dumb, Carson later told a colleague, just trapped in the dumbest role Hollywood ever wrote. From the orphanage to superstardom, Monroe's story was a fairy tale that turned into a tragedy. The studios built her image, sold her innocence, and then punished her whenever she tried to assert control. They gave her beauty contracts, not respect. Every attempt she made to prove her intelligence, from studying acting with Lee Strasberg to forming her own production company, was met with ridicule. Carson admired her courage to rebel, but he also saw how isolated she'd become. By 1962, the drugs and sleepless nights had become routine. Her death was officially ruled a probable suicide, but Carson, like many of his generation, never believed that was the whole story. What he knew for sure was that Hollywood had taken a vulnerable woman and turned her into a myth, and myths, unlike people, can't survive reality. Marilyn wasn't fragile. Carson once said, quietly, she was exhausted from pretending she wasn't. For Gig Young, the charm that concealed a void. Gig Young's story disturbed Carson more than almost any other. Young had been a frequent guest on The Tonight Show in 1950s, witty, suave, and seemingly happy. But Carson, a man who hid his own pain behind humor, recognized something hollow in Young's laughter. Young won an Oscar for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? In 1969, yet his success couldn't fill the loneliness that plagued him. He married 5 times, drank heavily, and spiraled into depression. In 1978, in a horrifying final act, he shot his 5th wife and then himself just hours after their wedding ceremony. Carson was devastated. He refused to let The Tonight Show open with jokes that night. Instead, he began with a somber note about how the brightest light can hide the darkest shadow. Those who worked with him said he spent the rest of the evening unusually quiet, as if he'd glimpsed a reflection of himself in Gig Young's collapse. 5. Veronica Lake, the blonde who vanished. Few stars rose faster or fell harder than Veronica Lake. With her famous peekaboo hairstyle and sultry charm, she became an icon of 1940s cinema. But Carson saw her story as one of Hollywood's cruelest lessons, how quickly a woman's worth could expire in a system that worshipped youth. Lake's career declined after a series of box office flops. Studios blamed her difficult attitude, ignoring the anxiety and alcoholism that came from relentless overwork. By her 40s, she was virtually forgotten. A journalist once found her working as a bartender in New York, a far cry from her glamorous screen persona. When Lake later appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson treated her with unusual tenderness. He didn't make jokes about her fall from grace. Instead, he asked softly about her early days in film, letting her tell her story with dignity. After the show, he reportedly told a friend, "We built her up and then left her to drown." Lake died of hepatitis in 1973, penniless and largely forgotten. Carson called her death Hollywood's quietest tragedy. 6. George Reeves, the Superman who couldn't escape his role. George Reeves was America's first Superman, a symbol of hope for millions of children. But Carson knew that behind that symbol was a man trapped in a costume he could never take off. Reeves had dreamed of being a serious actor. Yet, after Adventures of Superman made him famous, no one wanted him for anything else. Directors saw the cape before they saw the man. Carson once said that Reeves was the loneliest hero in Hollywood. In 1959, Reeves was found dead from a gunshot wound. The official ruling was suicide, but whispers of foul play spread immediately. He had been romantically linked to Toni Mannix, the wife of a powerful MGM executive, Eddie Mannix, a connection that many believed led to his death. Carson, who had worked at NBC during those years, heard the same rumors. He never repeated them publicly, but privately he expressed doubt that Reeves had taken his own life. "Hollywood loves heroes," he once remarked, "but it has no use for them once they take off the cape." 7. Natalie Wood, the star who drowned in secrets. The last tragedy that Carson spoke about privately was Natalie Wood, the radiant child star, who grew into one of the most beloved actresses of her generation. Her death in 1981 stunned him. Wood had spent her life performing under pressure. As a child, her mother forced her into acting, warning that failure would destroy the family. By adulthood, she was balancing a volatile marriage with Robert Wagner and a demanding career. When she died by drowning off Catalina Island, the mystery of what happened that night, with Wagner and Christopher Walken aboard the yacht, became one of Hollywood's darkest legends. Carson avoided speculation, but those close to him said her death shook him deeply. He had interviewed her several times and admired her resilience. What saddened him most was that, even in death, she couldn't escape the circus. Reporters swarmed, gossip spread, and the real woman vanished beneath rumor. Everyone wanted to solve her death, Carson reportedly said, but no one wanted to understand her life. After decades of conversations, funerals, and interviews, Johnny Carson came to a grim conclusion. These weren't isolated stories. They were symptoms of the same disease, an industry that built people up to sell tickets and then discarded them once they cracked under pressure. Carson had watched how the machinery of fame chewed through talent. He'd seen executives treat addiction, exhaustion, and mental illness as inconveniences. What connected Garland, Clift, Monroe, Young, Lake, Reeves, and what wasn't just tragedy, it was the way Hollywood demanded perfection from broken people, then blamed them for failing to survive it. He once told a writer friend, "This town worships the light, but never wonders what it costs to keep it burning." Johnny Carson never turned these stories into punchlines because, to him, they weren't about gossip. They were lessons, warnings about the price of fame and the fragility of human beings trapped inside myth. Behind the laughter, Carson carried a deep melancholy. He understood what it meant to live under constant scrutiny, to smile when your heart was breaking, to become a persona instead of a person. That empathy made him one of television's most beloved hosts and one of Hollywood's most quietly haunted men. In his later years, he withdrew from the spotlight, living quietly by the ocean. Friends said he never lost his humor, but his reflections on those 7 stars stayed with him until the end. "They were beautiful," he once said, "and this town broke them because it couldn't love them without owning them." As the cameras fade and the golden age of Hollywood becomes legend, Carson's silence about those tragedies speaks louder than any monologue ever could. He reminded us that behind every bright smile on the screen lies a human story, sometimes glorious, often heartbreaking, and that remembering their pain is the least we owe them.